Before we start our discussion, here are our quick view answers. Rated at number 21, France is the G20 country not in the top 20 in the world in the United Nations Human Development Index ranking. Namibia is the African country listed here, not in the Low Human Development Index group. Most African countries rank in the Low and Medium Human Development Index groups, with none in the Very High Human Development Index group. Only Seychelles and Mauritius rank in the High Human Development Index group among African countries. For comments, adverts, and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. Africa needs to escape poverty and underdevelopment. But to do that, Africa must strive to understand the real causes of the maladies. Is there a link connecting underdevelopment with morality and leadership? What is morality? What is good leadership? To answer these questions, we have with us Dr. Charles Ndifon. Dr. Ndifon has a ministry spanning over a quarter of a century. As an apostle, he has impacted over 70 nations with the gospel of Jesus Christ. He is also a well-known, widely respected business strategist and consultant to major corporations around the globe. He has been sought after as an advisor to kings, presidents, prime ministers, and government leaders around the world. Please join us in our discussion with Dr. Charles Ndifon. All right, thank you, Dr. Ndifon. Happy to have you in our studios, our Magodi studios.
That's right.
Now, this is your first time on my show. We're glad that you were able to spare some time to come see us here in our studios.
Thank you.
Now, today, what we're looking at, if you look at the Human Development Index, you find that it's mostly African countries. When you're looking at the bottom of the scale, it's mostly African countries that rank there. Probably the bottom 20 countries are like mostly, perhaps with the exception of countries like Yemen also,
or Haiti,
or Afghanistan,
yes,
or perhaps Haiti. Yes. Mostly African countries.
Yes.
And then if you look at other scores, if you look at electricity provision, Africa also ranks very low. That's why they call the continent the dark continent. So the question is, in terms of development, why are we so underdeveloped? Does it have any connection with leadership and with morality or anything like that?
First of all, we have to define what morality is, yes, and what leadership is, and yes, then we put that together. One of the things you find that morality is the standard by which we define right and wrong. And one of the other things you find out, it comes from either yourself, from the family, sometimes from the community, or from religion, from the government, or other entities that make this up, and that influences how the thought process of the people normally is. So when you understand that, and you understand who's leading in that, and how they come to decisions that actually moves the community forward, then you begin to talk about leadership and morality. Now, why Africa is in certain ways in that direction is because everything rises and falls on leadership. So anything that is wrong with a place, you just look at the leader, because it becomes an expression of his leadership or her leadership. Yeah. And so when we talk about morality and moral judgment, I think for most part it has to do with what values do these leaders hold dear, that is influencing the destiny of the people. So it actually has to do with what views have shaped their actions. So I agree with you that it has something to do with that. But not only that, is whether they have the will to explore other alternatives also. Because one thing about morality is if it's derived from the society, from the country, then as the country changes, the moral values would also change. So depending on what direction the change is progressing, it determines what direction the economic and socioeconomic condition of people goes to.
So now that you got over 54 or so different countries in Africa. How could it be? How could it be so coincidental that almost every single one of them is underdeveloped? Of course, if we take the exception of South Africa and maybe go to North Africa and look at some of the Northern African countries. But in the middle, right there, most of the countries are underdeveloped. How did it so happen that we have poor leadership amongst these countries?
I guess some of it is influences and mindsets. You know, some of the leaders are in an echo chamber. You know, basically they echo each other's thoughts, basically group thinking. They hang around similar people. You've got to step away from the mindset of what's not working. Take example, Rwanda. When I was invited by Kagame to go there in 2011, it was a big surprise to me. When you talk about Rwanda, you think about genocide. But Rwanda is a totally different country. By 2013, every child in the country owned a laptop. Every community in Rwanda, this is Africa, in the middle of Africa, every community in Rwanda has free Wi-Fi. This is Rwanda 1994 genocide. What was the difference? The people came together after the atrocities and they forgave each other. The Truth and Reconciliation happened. They confronted the situation and then they forgave each other and they said, this is one Rwanda. And when I was there in 2011, the pulse was their goal for 2015. Everybody spoke the same language. There was unity amongst the people. You couldn't tell the Tutsis from the Hutus. Everybody was on the same. So that's an example of leadership in the midst of leadership failure. But what accounts for that? The will to lead differently. Because in Africa, sometimes people get comfortable when they're in leadership and everybody acquiesces to them. Partly is because they want to gain or get some favors from some of those people. So my take on that is, why is it kind of common in Africa? Partly is because no one actually challenges those that are in leadership fiercely enough to change the narrative of what's happening. It doesn't have to be. Isn't it amazing that Africans, when they go abroad, they do so well? When they fit into a different system. Could it be that it's the system in which we find ourselves? Exactly. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to come and change the system. We don't change the system, get rid of it.
So, you know, like good thing you talked about Rwanda. When you look at the same Human Development Index scale that we're talking about, Rwanda actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, ranks the highest.
That's right.
Amongst African countries on that scale. So, but how did we get Paul Kagame? Was it by luck? Because he comes from the stock.
That's right.
Because oftentimes I say, okay, if you bring me a leader, I'm going to look at the stock from which that leader came. And the leader is probably going to reflect that stock. So what's the difference?
So you can come from the ghetto, but doesn't mean the ghetto has to stay with you. It's called exposure.
What will wash the ghetto away from you?
The first thing is exposure. If you want to change a person, change their thinking. What are they exposed to? Who is influencing them? Those are the things you want to think about. What is the passion of their heart? Those are the things. You find a young man, for example, in the ghetto, grew up with all this killing and drugs and everything, and still makes it. That the surgeon Carson, Ben Carson, he came through all of those things with all the bad things and became one of the best surgeons in the world. What accounted for that? Partly is your background. In the midst of those things, they are still good leaders, but they're never given the opportunity to lead because of vested interest in different sectors. That's really the problem. So most of what we see as a problem are so ingrained in the system that you're trying to change the system and the system actually sucks you in and spits you out. So if we are going to do anything different in Africa, we need a rude awakening in Africa. We have to get rid of whole generation.
How do we do that?
First of all, the electorates have to be a little more educated in how they vote.
But you see, but that's the problem. How do you get them to be educated? Because they are in the system already. They come through the ranks. They come through as local government chairman. They have become senator. They become governor. There's a whole host of them. They control the system. So who comes from outside to make changes?
Well, this is the key. A lot of times I hear the people in Nigeria say, oh, we just like the American system. They're not. The American system is set up that the very powerful do not rule everything. The power actually comes from the people. For example, you can win the popular vote and still not become president.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
As we just saw.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea is the smaller states have a say. Everybody has some say. You cannot just keep it to the East Coast or the West Coast to decide who's president. Yeah. In other words, you have more of a representative democracy. You have the electoral college where they actually vote. And you don't really vote. It's based on who wins in those small areas. So they say in America, all politics is local. Yeah. But in Nigeria, all politics is national. Yeah. What's the difference? In Nigeria, from the national coffers, you spread the money out. Mm. In the United States, everything is raised locally. Yeah. So if you're not a local person, you really don't have much of a say in the local area. Yeah. So even if money is coming from other places, the local people know how to control the narrative for their local election, and they're actually really represented in the national body. Yeah. So some of it is there has to be some systemic changes in how things are, even in the Constitution.
The problem is how to get them to happen. I know that you're well-traveled, and in fact, you've been invited to address parliaments.